Out! Kris had woken up in a good mood. The night before, he had lightly flirted with an attorney while watching Monday Night Football at a little bar in Georgetown. He'd cheered on Denver, while the attorney rooted for the New York Giants, and they'd playfully jabbed at each other throughout. At the end of the game, the attorney gave him a long, lingering stare over his slim chinos, his tucked-in button-down open at the neck and showing off his undershirt and his shell necklace, the one he wore when he went out, to his spiked hair. He'd bitten his lower lip. "Want to get out of here?" Kris had thought he'd never ask. They made out in the parking lot, pressed against the attorney's BMW before trading blowjobs in the back seat. After, Kris straightened his clothes and headed to his car, going home, alone. He was a professional now, or trying to be, holding down a job. His college days of waking up in a different bed almost every day of the week were behind him. "Maybe I'll see you next week," the attorney had called after him. "Maybe." Buoyed by the night before, Kris had wound his way through the North Virginia traffic to Langley early in the morning. He'd smiled at the guards who glared at him as he badged his way into headquarters and then to CTC. The guards had shut up about the Monday night game as he passed, as if him hearing their conversation would somehow mean something. He'd smirked and twiddled his fingers. At his desk, he had read the overnight cables, shaking his head over the reported suicide bombing of General Ahmad Massoud of the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan. Massoud had been one of the better men in the dusty backwater of Afghanistan, a force against the Taliban. He'd risen to get his second cup of coffee, wondering about the future of the tiny, forgotten country he was in charge of monitoring. Would the Taliban seize control of the entire nation? Would that be the end of the rebellion against the Taliban's chokehold? What about Al-Qaeda, shielded by the Taliban? In the break room, he had to start a second pot of coffee. Everyone always let it run dry, down to the dregs that burned and stank. He was pouring his creamer, wondering for the 1,000th time about updating his resume and getting out of the CIA, when he heard the first whisper of a plane crash in New York. The CIA was shaping up to be a rough career. Kris was surrounded by Type A personalities, people who stared unflinchingly into the darkness of the world and believed they could bend the globe's swirling maelstrom to their own will. Kris could barely get the security guards to say hello to him. Who was he to change the world? He stood out, with his tweed sports coat and ascots and crisp button-downs. In a world of clandestine operators in rumpled khakis and polos with coffee stains, he was a Milan fashion model. In 2001, that meant something in a man. Everyone, of course, noticed. Everyone talked. He could count on one hand the few people who spoke regularly to him, who were friendly. Maybe that was why he was isolated on the Afghanistan desk. Maybe it was time to start looking for another career. Back in 1999, a man had stopped him outside his advanced Farsi class at George Washington University. He'd hung in the corner of the hallway, keeping obsessively to himself like he lived in the shadows by choice. He'd had 2 cell phones on his hip. In 1999, barely anyone had a cell phone. "Mr. Caldera? Kris Caldera?" "Who's asking?" "I'd like to talk to you about a possible job." He had handed Kris a business card with the CIA's logo on the front. He hadn't known then what it meant that he was being sought out by the CIA. He was a gay Puerto Rican kid on a poverty scholarship to GWU, and he didn't have a single ounce of blue blood in him, not one single connection or friend of his father's he could call on. It was only 4 years since President Clinton had rescinded the ban on homosexuals being allowed to hold security clearances, only 4 years since people like him were allowed to serve openly in sensitive national security positions. Not that anyone did serve openly. The closet was still shut and barricaded from the inside. "Why me?" He'd stuck out his hip, and he had lip gloss on and smudged eyeliner from waking up in Beta Theta Pi's frat house that morning. "We hear you're good with languages, particularly ones we're interested in." He loved languages, loved the way the mind skipped and danced over converting rules of grammar, syntax, and expression, twists of phrase, and linguistic layups. He'd grown up speaking Spanish at home and English at school, and a mix of everything on the streets where he ran with other brown kids in lower Manhattan. In middle school, he'd crushed on older boys, writing long love letters in French that he dreamed of whispering to the shortstop on the school baseball team. In high school, he had worn a school